Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Deal Sorcery Podcast. Today, we're joined by Mike Alberts, Principal and Head of Business Development at Cohere Capital, a lower middle market private equity firm based in Boston that partners with family and founder-owned businesses in tech and business services. Mike's career has touched deal execution, operations, and now full-time BD. That mix of experiences is a big reason why, for Mike, BD has become the best job in private equity. And we'll talk about what clicked for him and how those earlier roles shaped the way he shows up in sourcing and founder conversations today. We also get into something you've probably seen if you follow Mike online. Mike is the force behind what we're calling the M&A Fitness Club, conference runs, early morning workouts, and a growing crew of people in the deal world who would rather sweat together than just grab another cocktail. We'll dig into how that started, why shared effort and a bit of suffering can build deeper trust than a typical networking event, and how fitness turned into a real relationship flywheel for his BD work. And then we zoom out and talk about building a BD function from scratch at a new firm. Mike joined Cohere at inception, and part of his mandate was to stand up the sourcing engine. We get into how he went about that and what best-in-class BD looks like at Cohere. So if you're in BD today, thinking about making the jump into BD or trying to build a sourcing engine inside your firm, this episode will give you a practical look at what that actually feels like day to day. This is Deal Sorcery. So Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you guys having me on. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so cool to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And I think a good place to start might be kind of your origin into M&A. Can you tell us how you originally broke into investment banking?
Yeah, absolutely. I went to college down in SMU in Dallas, Texas. I was a liberal arts major. So I was in English and markets and culture, which is sort of like behavioral economics. So finance, accounting, M&A wasn't really on my radar. But through a few kind of random internships, I learned about investment banking, and I thought, wow, M&A has got to be the greatest place to start a career. But I didn't have any relevant experience. I didn't really know what investment banking was. So I just started to cold call investment banks. I really talked to anybody that would talk to me. So I asked friends of friends, friends' parents. I even talked to my best friend's high school girlfriend's father at one point. He was actually super nice and just said, my firm's never going to hire you, but he was helpful. And I figured if I want to get a job here, I'll just do it by brute force. And it turned into, one investment banking offer, and I took it. And that was at BB&T Capital Markets in their DC office. And sort of the rest is history.
Why were you so interested? Like what drove you to want to get into this?
Yeah, I grew up, my father was in medicine. My mother was a high school math teacher. And I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And my grandfather had a little steel business where he basically bought steel and punched and made angle iron. So just a little, 5 guys in the shop, small business. And I thought my grandfather was the coolest guy in the world. And he's certainly one of the coolest people I've ever met. And I thought, wow, being an entrepreneur, having my own business would be incredible. But I started a business in high school. I started one in college, and they weren't really successful. And when I discovered investment banking, it seemed like the best way for me to meet entrepreneurs, spend time with CEOs and CFOs and CROs, et cetera, and learn everything about a business, corporate finance, accounting, just really kind of get a front seat in the action right out of college.
So it sounds like it really boiled down to just kind of access to entrepreneurs, or like having a front row seat to their journey.
Yeah, it was absolutely that. I think one of my favorite parts of my job today is on a daily basis, I get to meet visionary entrepreneurs that have built awesome businesses that in some cases, I'm like, I can't believe that this is a company, but it's awesome that it is. And there's so many ways to make money in our economy, whether it's tech or more, product-based, industrial, like there's just so many cool things. And every time I've met an entrepreneur, I've just been kind of blown away at their story, how some of their stories make tons of sense. And some of them, it's sort of a winding road to success. And I saw banking as my opportunity to surround myself with those kind of people.
It's so interesting, right? And I just have always viewed it as kind of like the practical MBA to an extent, right? Like to not just study business and entrepreneurship, but like to be there, be in it, be around the most transformative moments of somebody's life and see them kind of, I guess, rewarded for all the value they've added, right?
Totally. That was the coolest part for me about banking. I worked at BB&T for a year and then Houlihan for 2 years. I was in the aerospace and defense group. So all the clients were defense contractors, government services, aerospace companies, manufacturers. And a lot of these businesses were, small family-run businesses or a couple of guys that got together at a bigger firm and wanted to do it differently. And they're creating their own culture. And they're just sort of building it from the ground up. Get one customer, get another customer, and see what happens. They weren't worried about all the things that you learn in business school. Caveat, I've never been to business school, but I've read some books. I know a lot of people that have, but the sort of banking playbook or the private equity playbook, they didn't know about that. They were just trying to deliver a service or a solution or a technology to their customers. And the coolest part for me was not only hearing the story, but being able to add value to sort of help them, right? Early on, I was building a lot of revenue builds or projection models, right, as an analyst. And, these guys were able to think it, and then I was able to put that on paper for them. And as an analyst right out of college, to be able to add any sort of value and help them think through their business was so cool. And I like to say that I don't know that I would have learned as much as I've learned about accounting and finance had I studied it in school. I learned it because it was on the job and I had to. And it was a practical application. I'm talking to these guys about how are they making money and, how does that relate to their business? And then trying to explain that to them, it was really sort of a trial by fire. And a lot of the people that I got into banking with went to schools like Wake Forest and Duke and UVA, not SMU is a fantastic school as well, but I wasn't in the finance program. And I showed up to work on the first day in training and I didn't know anything about accounting. I knew enough to get the job and, but I knew nothing. And so I spent a ton of time at my desk late at night on the weekends, just trying to get up to speed. And again, I don't think I would have fully appreciated it or learned it had I sat in a classroom and had to.
I think you said the other day, this is one of the best jobs or the best job in private equity. Like, why is that? Is that this exposure to entrepreneurs or like what makes it the best job in private equity?
Yeah, I say that all the time. And I do think it's important to caveat that I think it's the best job in private equity for me. And I do think it is an incredible job. If you're at a firm that truly values the role, you're a decision maker and a true, utility player in the business of private equity. That's one thing. It's super fun and helpful to build a firm and to build a strategy. But for me, like I said, I love learning about businesses, thinking about strategy. What are ways we can grow this business? What value can we add? Or maybe we can't add value here. So maybe it's not a good investment for us to chase down. I love figuring that out early on. And then I love asking questions. I love learning about people. And I love trying to find a way to make a deal work. And that's kind of what I get to do on a daily basis. I think of myself sometimes as like a point guard. I get to dribble the ball down the court. I get to kind of look at the court and see where things are going to go. And then I pass the rock to the guys that score, right? And, at Cohere, that's Nick and Daniel, right? They're scoring and I'm just passing the rock and they're taking it from there.
But you're not out there jacking up the Steph Curry 3, huh?
No. As this industry has evolved, you want to focus on your strengths and focus on what aspects of the job you love. And when I was a banker in the beginning, as an analyst, I loved getting in front of the management teams. I loved spending time with them. I loved getting on the phone with buyers. I liked answering questions, managing processes. When I moved into private equity in my first role as an execution guy, I loved reading CIMs. I loved building initial models and presenting them to the partners and saying, hey, I think this is interesting and these are the reasons. And even in when I took a stint into operations, I was still a deal guy. I loved finding out ways for us to build a new relationship with a customer. How could we add value? And I liked explaining that to them and talking to them and, really getting curious. And in the operations, I didn't love the day-to-day of let's make sure everybody shows up to work on time. Let's make sure everyone's hitting their metrics. I didn't love that stuff. I loved sort of the deal making, the strategy. And again, that's sort of why it comes full circle, why I love doing what I do, because I get to do the things that not only I enjoy, but I think I'm truly good at.
You get to be a problem solver, constantly trying to figure out how to add value.
Absolutely. And I think it goes, for our portfolio companies as well, right? Like I'm not in the day to day with these guys and gals, but I'm thinking, what information am I hearing in the market that could be helpful for them? Or did I just meet another private equity firm that has a company that could be a customer to one of our companies, and putting our CEO in touch with them and, connecting those kind of dots? I truly get a genuine joy out of that.
Mike, in my seat, I often think about the different backgrounds for business development roles in PE. So I'm curious, you talked about the things that you enjoyed in operations, and you've got this combination of kind of deal execution and operations experience now in BD. What did you pull from that time that you think helps what you do today?
I joined this company called Shields Health Solutions in a pretty cool role. Essentially, the two founders were looking to hire smart people that worked in private equity or consulting or banking and bring them in and then just kind of attack a problem. When they hired me, there wasn't really like a specific role that I was going to work on. But when I got there day one, I met their chief revenue officer, and he's like, I really love some help building out our sales team. And so my first real job at the company was helping him manage the hiring of outside, inside sales, building out a CRM, customizing it, and then putting some sort of structure around it. And I'll give a ton of credit to him. This guy, who's still a very close friend of mine, Matt Conway, is just an incredible leader, an incredible sales manager, and an incredible salesperson himself. And he came from EMC, where he had built and run sales teams before doing corporate development. But, I got to learn, like, what is it like in tech sales? How are you building out these teams? And instead of me sitting in the seat of like an SDR or an outside salesperson doing the calling, I was thinking, how many of the hospital systems that we're selling to do we need to call a day? Who within the hospital system do we need to talk to? Where is that going to go? Are we talking to the right decision makers? And I got this sort of crash course in sales, and I loved every minute of it. It was such a fun environment. And I also, getting to work with Matt, I had a good opportunity to meet with a lot of the CEOs of hospital systems and chief pharmacy officers of hospital systems and talk to them about our model and what we were doing. And so I sort of learned that backbone when we launched Cohere and I moved into the business development seat. I sort of applied all of those learnings exactly to what I do today. And that helped me with a lot of the structure.
Awesome background, man. We're so excited to have you on here. For anybody who has been on LinkedIn anytime in the last year and is in private equity, like they've for sure seen a picture of you with some other people post run, a little bit sweaty or workout, right? Like you got to give us the full story here, right? Like, I don't know, are we calling it the M&A Fitness Club? Like how did this come together and like, how's it been impacting you and kind of what you're doing in BD today?
I appreciate that. I'm going to have to give Matt the credit for the M&A Fitness Club. I like it.
Am I coining that?
I think you did. I'm a huge endurance sports fan. I love running. I love triathlon. I love running, biking, swimming. And I also like the social aspect of fitness. I like to get out there with other people and, kind of do that sweat and go through the suffering together. It's super fun for me. I've always liked fitness classes, et cetera. And I'm on the road all the time. I'm going on a run anyway, or I'm hoping to go on a run anyway. I thought a great way to create some accountability for myself was to get other people to go with me or invite other people. And it also, it adds another slot in the day, right? When you're on the road at a conference, if you ask somebody, hey, do you want to grab coffee or breakfast at 5 a.m.? They're probably going to say no. But if you say, hey, you want to go to a fitness class at 5:30 or 6, if they're a fitness person, they might be doing that anyway. And so it adds a slot in the day, it gives some accountability, and it's been a super fun way to meet people with no expectations. Just let's go out, have a good time, and let's get to know each other. And it actually started at M&A South 2 years ago with a couple of guys that wanted to go on a run. And yeah, it sort of snowballed. Once I took one picture and posted on LinkedIn, I started posting more. I started hearing people say, oh, Mike, I saw you were running. people that I, hadn't talked to in months. And I was like, this is a great way to stick out on LinkedIn. That's not just, here's a deal announcement. And now I have people that say, hey, I don't really run, but I'd love to be in one of the fitness pictures. Like, what can we do? Can we go to a solid core class? Can we go to a Barry's class? And I'm like, anything fitness, I'm game.
Beyond the community aspect, is there something, and now that you've been doing this for a while, and I imagine every time you're going somewhere, you're inviting people to join you for a run or a class. Is there something more to it about like the shared effort and like, kind of going out there and doing something that's hard together that makes it like more than just being, hey, this is early before we're all doing, our meetings? Is there something there about the effort put in that makes for better relationships than like grabbing drinks after a conference or going to play golf?
I totally think there is. I mean, when you're going on a 30 or 45 or even an hour run with somebody, you have a lot of time. So you can ask them, where'd you grow up? What'd you do as a kid? Where'd you go to college? Ask them college stories, where they met their husband or wife, or what are their kids like? And you can do that on a phone call or at lunch, but you just have this sort of long form conversation and time with people, which I absolutely love. And then I also think you're right about the sort of shared suffering or shared, hard work. Like when you start your day with something hard and you do with other people, you just get a sort of a different type of energy where nothing else the rest of the day is as challenging as that, or, things don't bother you as much because you just did something hard in the morning. And, for me, if I don't exercise in the morning, get a good sweat going, I'm a little off during the day. And so part of this, M&A Fitness Club has been sort of selfish, as I need to work out no matter how late my flight landed or how late of a dinner I was out at. And if you have somebody meeting you at an exercise class or for a run, you can't skip it.
It's interesting, right? Like we put so much time and energy into the structured conversations with like getting exactly what we want out of it. But the base of every quality work relationship I've ever had has like a deep personal or, philosophical connection point, right?
Yep.
And it's interesting, right? Like what you're doing here, it's a little bit of a hack, right? In a way where like you're effectively getting people to bias towards spending time with you on the things that actually matter, that are going to build a psychological connection with you, right? That'll be stronger in that 30 minutes than probably a 30-minute dedicated carved out window at the conference.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people have said, oh, I'm a runner, but I'm not that fast, or, I'm not really a runner, or what have you. And I think that the common misconception is that just because I post about running a lot on LinkedIn means I'm some fast, crazy athlete. I'm just not. Like you said, it's more about the connection I'm building and the time with somebody than it is about getting, the perfect workout in or the amount of miles that, I need to get in. It doesn't matter. I like to meet people where they are. And if somebody wants to go on a 2-mile run or a mile walk or whatever, I'd rather that, right? Because you're right. It is sort of a hack to building a relationship that's a little bit different. And all the people that I've run with or worked out with or what have you, 80% of the conversation is personal. And that 20% of business is generally more impactful than the 100% of business with somebody else.
No, it's powerful, man. I mean, clearly it resonates. People, are asking you to show up in the post. They want to be part of it. Like you're building those deep psychological connections, and I'm sure it'll continue to prove dividends. But I guess the question to me is like, what do V2 and V3 of this look like? Like, what does this evolve into?
I don't know. I think I hope that it keeps snowballing downhill. I've had some people reach out to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about leading a run at this conference. Like, how do you set it up? Like, what do you do? And I've helped, put together Strava routes or help them plan it out. And I'm hoping that it's sort of infectious. But what I've also discovered is I'm not the first person to do this, right? Like other people like to work out together. There's a group in Seattle that gets together on a monthly basis. They do a CrossFit class together. Mm-hmm. And I saw that they did that. I connected with them. And then when I was in Seattle, I kind of planned my city trip around it. I went with them and we worked out. And, I think half the people went every month and half the people just kind of showed up for the first time then. And, So that's what I hope, V2 and V3 turns into, where there's just always something to do on the road or in your own city where, fitness is a part of the relationship building.
Any advice for the person that's like, oh, I want to do it, but I don't know if I'm conditioned enough to kind of come out and join Mike tomorrow?
There is no level of fitness that can't join, and there is no job or role or title that precludes you. Anybody and everybody is welcome at any time. And, we try to be a no person left behind. So we'll set up a route, try to do loops, or at least set it up where people know if they're going to drop off early or something, we're not going to leave you behind in the middle of Minneapolis, right? Like by yourself, right? So yeah, it's sort of a come one, come all. I think another aspect of it that just popped into my head is I had a couple guys reach out to me around DealMax, like, hey, I'd love to meet at DealMax. And at that point, my schedule for meetings had already booked up. And I said, well, on Tuesday morning, I'm meeting in the lobby at 6 a.m. at the Aria, and we're going to swim at UNLV. If you want to join, meet us at 6. And then Wednesday, we're going to go for a run meeting at the Aria at 6:30. If you want to join, come. And one of the guys that showed up to the swim, he's like, it's super cool that you asked to swim. I haven't swam since high school, but I love it, And he showed up and we had a great chat. We had a great conversation in the car. And I'm probably going to meet with him first next time when he reaches out, because if I have time on my calendar, because, we had that shared experience.
Really cool. And it's awesome that it's inclusive, open to anybody. Dan and I will have to join you next time we take the show on the road. We'll look forward
100%.
to that. Talked about running. Now let's kind of run towards business development and sourcing. I think one of the many interesting threads that we can pull here is you got into BD at the ground level at your firm. Like you were tapped by a former colleague, and I think you did a lot more than just BD out of the start, but they kind of had an idea that you could be successful in the BD role as the firm was getting off the ground. So I think it'd be really interesting for listeners to hear like what that looked like, building out the function and some early steps that you took to kind of put Cohere on the map for founders or business owners, intermediaries. Like, for instance, how do you make sure that Cohere is on a buyer's list at a bank? Is it just, it takes time and you get in front of everyone? Things like that you had to focus on in the early days.
I really had the benefit of sort of figuring it out as I went, but, business development in private equity has been around for a while, and there are a number of OGs in the space, one of whom is on the podcast, right? Like it's a lot of guys that have been around this and have kind of created a path for themselves and their firms. And what I did initially when I got into the seat, or when I sort of moved over completely to running business development, focusing 100% of my time on BD, I just called every BD person I knew. And I asked for some introductions, or I even cold emailed some PE BD people and was like, hey, we know some people. I'd love to chat with you. And I just asked, how'd you get into BD? How'd you build your model? What do you do? One of the best parts about the BD ecosystem in our space is everybody's super collaborative, and most of the time are open to chatting and telling you. And so I just spent maybe a month or more learning about how other people had built their business development function. And I sort of took some things that I thought would make sense for our strategy, some things that might not work, took some learnings and figured maybe I'd do it a little different. And then I also pulled from what I had learned helping build the sales team at Shields, and sort of how we manage our folks and our outreach efforts. And then I just started trial by fire. And I went to all the investment banks that I had heard of, and I called anybody doing tech-enabled services, anybody doing, lower middle market, vertical software, which if you guys know anything about those industry, those are a lot of bankers. And I just started calling people and get on the phone, trying to tell the story. Here's Cohere. Here's what we like. Here's what we don't like. Here's what we've done in the past, and, would love to find ways to work together. And I think the one thing early on that I did, and I've continued to do, is I never get on the phone and just ask for deals, or, hey, let's talk through your pipeline. What do you have coming up? My approach is more, let me get to know you. Where do you spend time? Where do we spend time? How can I help you? How can we help each other? I think if you lead into any relationship with what can I do for that person, it'll sort of come back. The BD life cycle and, deal sourcing is a long game. And the relationships that I built in 2019 or 2020, we're seeing deals from today, or we're getting deals, done with those folks today, right? It takes a long time.
All relationships are long-term relationships, right?
Yeah.
So you had an interesting comment here, right? I mean, about effectively when you were making the jump back into doing the private equity thing and coming into the formation of this around Cohere, talking to a lot of people, you're talking about how everybody's collaborative, catching up with them, kind of sharing what works, what doesn't. I'm curious, as you were canvassing the market, what was the most surprising thing you heard?
Yeah, well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when I joined, after banking, I joined a firm called Gage Capital down in Dallas, small team, and they had hired a guy named Andrew Pikes, who was running business development for them at the time. And even though I was, doing execution, we would obviously be working with Pikes. He'd be bringing in deals, and I like to set up catch-up calls with bankers and, do a little bit of sourcing myself. And after I'd been at Gage for about a year, Andrew came into my cube, didn't have an office, came to my cube and was like, "Hey man, you should get into BD. You should come work with me. I'm going to hire somebody full time." And I was like, "No, I don't really want to do that. I appreciate it. I love execution. I'm going to keep doing this." And he's like, "Okay, well, if you ever change your mind," and if anybody knows Andrew is a brute force guy. He has an enormous market. He knows every single investment bank, and he saw a ton of deals. And so my only example before we started Cohere was Andrew. And what I learned in the market, and this is not about anybody specifically, this is just a general market comment. I learned that most people didn't really have an answer, right? They had, here's what I do, here's how I spend time, and here's what we've built. And this is what kind of works for us, but I'm still figuring it out. Even people that were, decades into their career. And I think it's because our space is ever evolving, right? If you turn back the clock 20, maybe 30 years ago, if you had money, you were getting deals. But now based on Preqin data, there's 6,000 private equity firms with funds in the US. There's independent sponsors, there's family offices, there's search funds. It's just so much harder to differentiate. And so, just going to ACG conferences or, calling financial sponsors people and asking for deal flow, it doesn't work. And maybe it did work at some point, but I found it super refreshing that not everyone had figured it out. And people were always trying to evolve and grow and change with the times. And I think that says a lot about, the great people that do business development.
That's awesome, man. It's super helpful. I just love to give everybody a sense for how did that inform and what does that turn into in the way of kind of Cohere's sourcing today, right? Obviously, know you guys are doing kind of the $2 to $15 million EBITDA businesses, business services, tech enabled. And I think I'd heard you say that you're doing the majority of your sourcing is not proprietary, right? It's intermediary and kind of network focused. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So 95% of our deals come through sell-side intermediaries.
Wow.
And I think within this space that we're investing in, tech-enabled services, software, again, like professional white-collar services, some investor, banker, broker, some buy side, somebody's called the founder or the management team at some point. And it's truly really hard to find proprietary deals unless you're incredibly pointing into the spear thesis development. I want to own a business that looks exactly like this. We only really want to look at businesses that are driven by technology, but we have sort of a wider end market or business model focus. And so, I'd say our strategy is very much focused on what I call the basic blocking and tackling that you absolutely have to do if you're a private equity firm. And that's, your monthly calls and emails and meetings with intermediaries and, business brokers, investment bankers, M&A community folks, right? You're hunting, you're calling to find deal opportunities. You're going to ACG events or M&A Source, right? You're going to the deal conferences and you're doing the circuit. But I like to take it kind of one step further in that. And we've set up some pretty repeatable and in some cases boring systems to make sure that we're talking to people on a quarterly basis or some people on a monthly basis, trying to stay, within compliance on keeping up to date with folks. Again, it's not calling and saying, what do you have for me today? It's just making sure that we're in front of people, they remember Cohere, or maybe being helpful to them in the interim. And then we like to take a very in-person approach. So we're in every tier 1, 2, maybe even 3 city once, twice, a couple times a year, making sure that we're meeting with folks in person. Again, mostly intermediaries or investment banks, but also companies, just to sort of build that longer term relationship. And it gives a good excuse to get in front of people, right? Because we're in the city.
Just tactically, does that mean it sounds like kind of tracking, right? For like, okay, here's the bankers that we have that we're prioritizing, right? And then for those bankers that are prioritized to kind of have like compliance of like, have we had a meeting with them in person in this month or in this quarter, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely that. And I think in the lower middle market and in the, long tail, as they say, right? Because we're doing kind of that sub 15 million of EBITDA deal, we're touching the middle market banks, the lower middle market banks, and then that proverbial long tail. And a lot of those smaller, regional focused investment bankers are really sharp bankers, and they may be generalists, right? They may have consumer products business today, a aerospace manufacturing business tomorrow, and then they, come across a tech-enabled services company. And making sure that we're building relationships with those people on a annual basis, even if they don't have a deal for us today, tomorrow, in a year, 2 years, so that when they do, they know that Cohere's good firm. They're going to be helpful to us. They're going to do right by us in the process, make us look good in front of our clients. And, there's some certainty to close because we've built a relationship with them over time. In some cases, we're getting manager presentations when we're putting in IOIs, not only because our value is in the right range, but because people say, oh yeah, we've built a relationship with the firm over the years. We know they're good people. So we're going to give you guys a shot, even if you're low on value or the role is a little more, et cetera.
With that approach of kind of trying to get in front of people in a certain amount of time, like, is it about prioritization and like, how do you prioritize, or is it just about kind of getting in front of as many people as often as you can to cover the long tail?
It's absolutely prioritization. There are certainly investment banks that, we're seeing a lot of deals from. We're taking a sim for every deal they're sending us, and we're submitting on a lot of them. And then there are firms where we're taking a lot of sims. Maybe we haven't submitted an IOI yet. But for us, we see deals from a pretty large group of discrete intermediaries. So meaning different intermediaries. So actually 40% of our deal flow comes from different intermediaries, which is pretty broad. And then, when we're submitting IOIs, it's that gets even bigger, right? And so it's not the same 10, 15 investment banks where we're seeing the same deals, we're competing with everybody, and we're putting in those IOIs. It's just a bit broader. And again, I think that's more for our opportunistic approach to broadly tech-enabled services, where we can see, hey, is this professional services business? Could it use some technology? Could we build some technology in here? Or, is this tool that they have internally, is that really a tech product that we could commercialize? Or, right, we're just trying to find those nuggets of growth. And you just have to kind of go fairly broad to find it.
When you say 40% from different or discrete intermediaries, does that mean you're saying that for the deals we look at, right, like 40% of them are coming from firms where that was the only deal we looked at with them?
Maybe not the only deal, but like I guess the takeaway is we're seeing deals from a large group of different firms.
Right. You're saying it's not like 80% of our deal flow comes from 2 investment banks, right? You're saying 40% of our intermediary deal flow comes from people that are like, again, we don't see much deal flow from them, and we're looking at this like individual opportunity with them, right?
Exactly.
That scale is something that comes up a lot in our conversations. Like the list of bankers, brokers that might represent a company in that kind of sub 15 or sub 10 million EBITDA. It's a long one. And you've talked a little bit about annual touch points, but do you have any other thoughts on like how to cover that many contacts at scale?
It is a tall task. We have a pretty collaborative approach to BD here at Cohere. And while I'm certainly the quarterback, I'm calling the plays on the field, I'm managing. All of our team plays offense and defense, right? So everybody is taking relationships. Everybody is, when we're going to a city to see a company, we're staying after the management presentation to meet with some folks in town, right? When we're going to a board meeting, maybe or a conference with a portfolio company, we're sticking around to see other people while we're in town. And so it's just adding like a little bit more here and there, and it compounds over time. I mean, even just back to our fitness conversation, even just adding one more meeting slot in the day, instead of, a breakfast, coffee, office meeting, lunch meeting, office meeting, dinner, 6 meetings a day, you do the fitness, you add 7, right? Or you add a late drinks meeting, you're at 8. So it's just like adding things on the periphery. And, I don't want to get across that we're just dialing for dollars all the time. And, it's people that we don't even know. It's just systematically building good relationships long term.
Do you have any metrics that you typically track, or like, how do you think about managing the typical day and the typical week of sourcing activities? Like, are there daily, weekly input or output targets? How do you manage it?
It's ever evolving, but it's really trying to get as many touch points as we can, meaningful touch points. And so at the basis, I'm trying to send anywhere from 10 to 20 emails a day to people either I don't know or I don't know very well and I'd like to build a relationship with. And I sort of have a never-ending list that we're kind of continuing to populate, and try to have 5 to 6 conversations a day, whether that's on the phone, in person. There could be some days where it's 15. Could be some days where it's 2 or 3, but these are arbitrary numbers that I came up with that have been achievable for us to sort of chip away long term. And we track interactions within our system, whether that's just calls with investment banks to ask about what they're working on, or calls to talk about specific deals. I probably should have pulled up some of those metrics for you guys I could have shared, but of the sort of direct hunting emails and calls, we try to manage like 2,000 a year, and how we're ever building that on a monthly basis sort of varies, right? So like if one day we're not hitting that 10 to 20, maybe the next day we're hitting 30, right? Or maybe one week we're just spending all of our time on outbound. Just try to set that up through systems within our CRM and managing some of our investment bank and intermediary relationships, so that this is a 120-day touch point. This is a 90-day touch point. This is a once a year touch point. This is they've made it clear they don't want to talk to us. We don't talk to them touch point. And
so it sounds like the biggest things that you think about measuring, right, is like number of outreaches and like keeping that consistent kind of top of funnel, like outreach sort of going. And then the second one is like number of conversations, right?
Yeah. And we actually do have this metric because we have our annual meeting coming up. We have about 1,000 interactions on an annual basis. Now, how that's broken up between just a in-person meeting to talk about nothing, or a in-person meeting to talk about a specific deal, or maybe somebody's coming into town, we're in town, that sort of varies. But yeah, we're having about 1,000 interactions on an annual basis.
And then do you think about, I always thought about trying to like plan, like, all right, this is my bucket, right? I have 1,000 interactions per year. And that like my number one job is to figure out how to spread those around, right? Or like how to best allocate those 1,000 interactions per year.
So I look at BD as a perfect mix, or at least for me in our strategy, it's a perfect mix of art and science.
Okay.
If you get to art, and the art would be, relationship building, maybe you're playing golf, or you're getting lunch, you're having dinner, or you're going on a run, right? If you get pure art, it's tough to be successful. It works, but it's tough to be consistently successful. Then you can get to science, where you say, I need to hit this metric every day, every month, every week, whatever, right? You're setting up repeatable systems. If you get to science, then you can it's also hard, I think, to be successful because you miss the art element. And so I wish I could tell you that I have like the perfect mirroring system that works for me, but the way that I have set up our system internally is we're always shooting for the moon and landing among the stars, because there's so many people out there, and you never know where your next deal is coming from. Some days my phone call list is all tech-enabled services, investment bankers that have got great deals coming up for us. And sometimes it's a bunch of folks that are really focused on old economy, or it's a bunch of, service providers that we may or may not use, or may not be able to refer us somebody. But we're making sure that, we're taking those opportunities, right? And so for me, it's a mixture of art and science. And I think about, how can we make sure that those interactions and those phone calls and those emails are really impactful, but I try not to like get too sucked in to like hitting a specific number, because actually it makes me think of something you said once. If you set up systems so much where you're like, I want to hit this number. If you want to hit 10 a day, is 10 a day better than 5 like really thoughtful outreaches where people are definitely going to answer, or you just want to hit 10 to 10? I think about that all the time, because I can even get really caught up in the number of, if I'm at an ACG event, did I have 50 meetings? Well, were half of those with folks we're never going to work with or low likelihood? Would it be better to have 20 meetings with people that are high likelihood? Absolutely. So maybe it's 30, right? It's the 20 that are the highest priority, best fit. And then those 10 people in the middle where you're like, could be, could not be, not sure. But we need to make time for that, because there's been so many people that have hit in that bucket that have come into the prioritization bucket over time.
It's kind of like placing your bets and being strategic in the places where you have enough information to be strategic, but allowing room for opportunism to ensure you don't over-engineer and something so that you're precisely inaccurate.
Dan, you're good. I mean, yeah, that's that. I think you hit the nail on the head. And it's similar to what I said about fitness meetings. I don't ever want to leave somebody out, or we're not better than anybody, right? There's room for everybody at the table, and just because someone comes to the table and doesn't bring something that's immediately valuable that day doesn't mean that they're not going to be valuable in the future. They may never be valuable, but you met somebody that you enjoy being around, and like that's the fun part about this business.
It brings up a good segue here. What you're doing with the fitness club, it's unique, and I'm curious, is there any aspect of what you're doing or just deal sourcing generally that you feel like is underappreciated in the PE community? Like, again, what you're doing is unique, and there are other people that have taken, like a content marketing strategy or similar kind of community building strategy. I'm curious, maybe outside of the Run Club, are there any other strategies or channels that you're experimenting with?
When you approach every relationship and every interaction with other people with the mindset of what can I do for them? How can I add value to them? And maybe not like pay a fee, but what can I do to improve their network, or who can I introduce them to, or what dots can I connect? Not only does it's selfish, it makes you feel good to help somebody else, but I think it opens up a different type of relationship. And our job is to find deals and is to sell relationships with investment banks and to sell founders and CEOs on why they should do a deal with us. But if we all in our industry approach that, the relationships that we're building with what can I do for the person across the table from me, I think we'd all be a lot more successful. And people are successful now, but being able to help other people, being collaborative with other private equity firms, something that has helped me differentiate in our market is doing curated events with other private equity firms. There are a handful of these private equity groups where folks will get together and throw a happy hour, have a dinner. I love that kind of stuff. I do that stuff. But I'm in a group of folks, there's 7 of us, and we go do city trips together where one of us will be the lead of the city. We'll set up all the meetings. We'll set up a social event, and everybody else just has to show up and bring what they have to the table. And I think that building up systems where you can help other people in the industry, it's a good way of helping yourself as well. And so again, it's not something that I came up with or I'm, completely revolutionizing the industry, but I focus a lot of my time there. And that's paid dividends for us.
I love that idea, right? Like kind of collaborative, co-hosted happy hour sort of thing, right? Or like city trip, just like, hey, we're going to be here. We're going to show up. We're all going to bring stuff to the table, right?
It's been fantastic. I wasn't the one that came up with the group. There's a guy in our industry who reached out to me to set it up. And, we brought a group together, and the group has evolved over the years where we've had some, members leave, some members come back in. And it's something some OGs in our industry created, where they'll partner with a law firm in a different city and, throw some meetings and do something together with other private equity firms. And again, it's just a good way of, everyone's busy, right? The investment bankers are busy, founders are busy. And if you can offer them, you can meet with 7 different private equity firms together instead of just one. Well, maybe that's a good use of my time. Or maybe there's 20 of us, right? There's a group of, I think it's about 20 of us, be in New York in December and, have somebody in our crew who's organizing a happy hour that's going to be co-hosted by all the private equity firms, and the investment bankers are going to come, and it's a good way to, again, meet a lot of different people. So there's ways of sticking out in our industry, but there's also ways of being super collaborative, which I think just, again, the tide raises all boats, right? Like you elevate each other. Just because I focus my time on finding tech-enabled businesses, and so does somebody else, doesn't mean that we're not going to win the same deal. So if something's not a fit for me, it could be a fit for somebody else.
Totally. Yeah. And it ties back to what you described when you first started at Cohere, and how the community of BD professionals is open, and it's not always sharp elbows, or it's often not. So it's a great way to kind of tap into those dynamics and help each other out. I wanted to talk a bit. We like to kind of reinforce everything that we've talked about in this conversation. And there are still a lot of firms that don't have dedicated BD professionals. And hopefully they listen to this episode and they see like all the things that someone like Mike could be doing for their firm. But I guess, how would you summarize the value of a BD professional in a private equity firm?
It's sort of like, you would never have a company without having someone focused on selling new customers and driving revenue, right? Whether you want to call it a chief revenue officer, head of sales, or whatever, you would never do that, right? Because you need somebody focused on growing the business. Sure, sometimes the CEO wears multiple hats and he or she is the one out there selling, but the businesses that are differentiated have dedicated folks out there trying to sell new business. And, for a private equity firm, when you're bringing in new deals and you get excited about one and you start building that relationship and you get into the later stages of diligence, sometimes you get into the deal bunker and there's not time to do those 10 calls a day or, whatever you set up your system in your firm. And so to have somebody that's like their number one focus is always hunting, is always finding opportunities, is always building relationships, it keeps a flywheel going where there's always something to work on. More and more private equity firms are seeing that. But it's not just, again, someone to go out there and collect teasers and throw them over the wall. I think where it's differentiated is you have senior professionals that understand what it takes to get a deal done, understand the thesis of the firm, understand what the deal partners are really focused on and what they like, or what the investment committee is really excited about, and are able to triage that out there quickly, so that when the BD person is passing the rock off to the deal team, is something that's worth their time and is a good use of time. Not to say that every deal we bring in is going to be a deal we're going to close, but it leverages your time. And I think right now, any role in a firm, we're all just trying so hard to find more time to think, find more time with our family. It just leverages people's time.
For a BD professional who maybe doesn't have a seat at the table, or is at a firm that doesn't value BD and sees it as, we send this person out to find us deals and it's a separate thing, what advice would you have for them to maybe advocate for themselves?
If you're in the role at a firm and you've been there long enough, you know how valuable it can be in not only driving new opportunities, but staying on top of relationships And again, like I said, leveraging time for the investment partners and the investment professionals. And I think if you're at a firm where they've not quite seen the value yet, it's sort of on you to find a way to demonstrate that value. And if that's, every time you go to a conference, it's, writing out some hot button notes. Here's what I learned. Here's some interesting things happening. Here's what I'm tracking. I think it's a communication loop. One thing that we set up really early on here is I call them my deal insights. Sometimes daily, more like weekly basis. I'm sending just internally information, the conversations that I had, maybe some of the deals we're tracking, but more so, what are we hearing in the market? Is this deal going to be coming out? Are people really interested in this theme? And sending that information back to the firm to arm them so that they know what's going on. That's just one way of showing value. Or here's our funnel metrics on a weekly or monthly basis, and just kind of reporting back to showing here's what we're building and here's what's working, or here's what we've built and here's what's not working. I think it's an over communication in showing what you're doing on a daily and monthly basis that's driving not only the visibility of the firm, but also improving opportunities. You kind of have to tell people what you're doing. They may not just kind of come to it themselves. So that's what I would suggest is really trying to find ways to report back and show what you've been driving on a daily basis.
That's a great suggestion. A communication loop that's displaying what you're putting out there. Mike, that was really a great conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground, did a lot of miles. Maybe before we wrap up here, what's next for the M&A Fitness Club, if you choose to use that title there, and how can people get involved?
Honestly, if anybody is interested in joining a run or doing a fitness class or something at a conference, shoot me an email. My email's on our website. It's just malberts@coherecapital.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. If there are any triathletes out there, we have the M&A Triathlon Summit coming up next year. We had our first inaugural event this year. We had about 25 M&A professionals do half Ironman Chattanooga together. There was a networking dinner and a post-race celebration and a couple shakeouts together. So it wasn't just do a triathlon. It was a lot of relationship building around it as well. We had some awesome sponsors that made that possible. And we're going to do it again in 2026. The date is June 7th, 70.3 Western Mass. If you're interested in that, reach out to me. We still have room for some more people.
Great. Well, Mike, this has been awesome. Thanks for joining us. And for everyone listening, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and reach out with questions for future guests at matt@dealsorcery.com or Dan@dealsorcery. And we'll look forward to the next one. This is Deal Sorcery.